Have you ever wondered why the U.S. hasn't really been brought up in the conversation of deep sea mining? That's because it's never really been a topic, probably because they can't really deep sea mine in international waters because they are not part of the United Nations Convention of the Law of the Sea, which plays a big role in shaping the deep sea mining. And the fact that the U.S. is not part of it has played another a huge role in the country not being able to approach deep sea mining, both legally and politically. So today we're on the podcast, we're going to be talking about why the U.S. hasn't gone into it, and latest thing of the metals company, which is a Canadian company, trying to work with the U.S. and Donald Trump to actually start mining within the deep sea, within their natural borders, within the United States exclusive economic zone. We're going to be talking about that on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. A scary topic, but nonetheless, we need to talk about it. Let's start the show. Hey everybody, welcome back to another exciting episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, and this is the podcast where you find out what's happening with the ocean, how you could speak up for the ocean, and what you can do to live for a better ocean by taking action. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about new developments that happened at the end of the ISA meetings, the International Seabed Authority meetings that happened in Kingston, Jamaica recently, where at the end, I think the second last day or the last day of the meeting, a spokesperson for the TMC, which is the metals company, a Canadian firm, it says that it plans to seek permission from the United States rather than from the International Seabed Authority to mine polymetallic nodules in the Clarington-Clipperton zone. This is notable as the U.S. is not a signatory of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which is known as UNCLOS. I'm going to call it that because it's easy to do. I know it's jargon, but it has domestic laws but it also has domestic laws governing deep sea mining. So the big question here, once it came out, people are like freaking out. Look, Donald Trump is president. You never know what's going to happen. He tends to like extractive processes. Deep sea mining is an extractive process that could be a little lucrative in terms of the money it brings, not only to the companies that work with the countries that would like this to happen, but also the country itself. They want to make money and they want to be able to use their natural resources to make money. So I can't blame them. And somebody like Donald Trump, who's into making money and is not having a great 3 months, depending on how you look at it. But lately, the stock market has crashed from his tariffs, his reciprocal tariffs, taxing islands that are not inhabited, are only inhabited by seals and penguins and stuff. And so it's not going great. Now, this is not going to make him popular for a lot of people, which he doesn't care about. But there are some really interesting matters at hand of, can the U.S. actually use, the metals company to be their exploratory deep sea mining company? And that's really what it comes down to. There was a great article written by Dr. Andrew Thaler, who's been on the podcast a number of times to talk about deep sea mining in the deep sea. He's a deep sea ecologist. It's involved in a lot of projects. The last time we actually had him on, he was talking about his foray into D&D for forest ecology, Dungeons and Dragons with community members for forest ecology. So he talks a lot about things, but his main focus right now is deep sea mining, and has been over his whole career, really, because he did his PhD in it. It's been the editor of the largest deep sea mining magazine in the world, and he just keeps writing on southernfriedscience.com, which was his blog that he started with a number of different colleagues back in the day. And it's an amazing article. I highly recommend that you take a look at it, because we're going to be talking about it all day today on this episode, during this episode, which doesn't take all day to record. I trust you. Trust me. But we're going to be talking about it. And so go over to southernfriedscience.com, check out the article. I'll put the link in the show notes. But he talks about relevant U.S. legislation that matters when we're looking at deep sea mining in the U.S. So it's really, can this company in particular do this? They're probably the best place company because they have so much money invested. They have the technology. They know the technology. They've been working with the ISA for a while. Now, the reason why they're going to the U.S. is because the ISA has recently changed secretary generals. The secretary general now is, it's Miss Letitia, and if I can remember her last name, I don't know. I still have the article up here. Miss Letitia Reyes de Carvalho, who was basically started her secretary general position on January 1st, 2025. She is also an oceanographer. She is the fourth Secretary General of the ISA. And she was elected in August. And it was a bit of a surprise because the ISA Secretary General that was there before, he was known to be a little bit more biased towards the companies. I don't know if that's true or not, but some of his policies that came out, some of his focuses have come out that said, hey, you know what? Like, yeah, we're gonna mine eventually. It's just a matter of doing the regulations and figuring this out. While a lot of other people are like, let's pause, including many countries, let's just pause this and let's figure out whether this is going to be safe or not. So the election came up because Ms. Letitia was like, you know what? I think I can do a better job. I can be more partial. I'm an oceanographer. I understand what's happening in the deep sea. I have a better understanding than most. And so she gets elected. All of a sudden, great for the environment. At least we have somebody who has a background in oceanography. We've been asking for people in these positions to have that type of background and not just a business background. So ISA was like, we need to hold off on deep sea mining. We need to do more research and we need to discuss this a little bit more. TMC was like, the metals company, the Canadian company was like, no, I don't want to do that. I want to mine. I'm sick of this. And I know I'm not going to get the answers that I need in this, in this forum, so I'm going to go to a democracy, a country that has a new president who's very into extractive processes, and I'm going to go ahead and talk to Donald Trump and say, hey, Donald, hey, Mr. President, let's, how about we start extracting polymetallic nodules off the seafloor in jurisdiction, like in a jurisdiction for the U.S. And so apparently, according to studies or according to reports, the administration, surprise, surprise, is interested in that kind of stuff. And so we're going to discuss some of the relevant legislation, U.S. legislation, that matters in this situation. So the first thing identified by Dr. Andrew Thaler was the Deep Sea Hard Mineral Resources Act, which regulates exploration and exploitation of deep sea minerals. The other one is the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. It extends U.S. laws to the seabed and subsoil of the Outer Continental Shelf. And then there's the Jones Act, which is also known as the Merchant Marine Act of 1920, which mandates the cargo transported between U.S. points must be on vessels built, owned, and operated by U.S. citizens. So here is the thing. For the compliance to meet, for the TMC to meet the compliance, it really comes down to the Jones Act. The Hidden Gem, which is a vessel owned by All Seas, which is a Dutch company, works for TMC. The MV Coco, which is owned by Magellan, based in Guernsey, which I believe is foreign. I think it's in France. They are not U.S. owned. Neither vessel complies with the Jones Act requirements, posing a significant operational challenge for TMC. So essentially what happens is, for this to be in compliance with the Jones Act, the ship that's carrying the cargo from point where they extracted, so point A to point B back to a U.S. port, has to be American. Right now, TMC does not have an American ship. Does that mean they can't get an American ship? I'm sure they can find it. I'm sure they can figure it out. But at this point, they may not be able to use that. The other thing, too, is because the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act extends jurisdiction to certain seabed areas potentially like outside of the U.S. jurisdiction, this classifies TMC's mining sites as U.S. points once operations are commenced. So essentially, the loophole of saying, hey, you know what, even though this is beyond U.S. jurisdiction, this is our land. So going into like the Gulf of Mexico and certain places in Mexico are actually available. Well, not so. Because it'll still be considered American jurisdiction according to the Outer Continental Shelf Lands Act. So that means they still have to, the Jones Act still applies, and they still have to use American vessels. Again, can they get American vessels? I'm sure they can find something. I don't know what their contracts are like with the other two vessels, but I'm sure they could figure it out if they really, really want to, if they're motivated, which seems like they are. So it's pretty interesting. The U.S.-Mexico Western Gap Treaty extended the U.S. jurisdiction over specific high seas areas, indicating that the U.S. can assert jurisdiction over seabed resources beyond their jurisdiction in the exclusive economic zone. So That's something of interest. And if the U.S. claims jurisdiction over high seas resources, the Jones Act does apply, as I mentioned before. So to comply with the Jones Act, TMC would have to use vessels that meet the stringent requirements, which the current fleet does not. And this regulatory hurdle could complicate TMC's strategies to operate under U.S. jurisdiction and may require significant adjustments to their operational plans. And to be honest, if the U.S. gets the idea of starting to, mine for these polymetallic nodules, what's in it for them to say, hey, we're going to hire a Canadian company? Like, let's be honest, Canada's not in favor with the U.S. right now. Also, they want it for themselves. There's nothing stopping them from saying, hey, you know what? We're actually just going to get a company ourselves or do it by government, and we'll figure it ourselves, and we'll take the time and we'll get the relevant information, the relevant technology, the relevant ships, and we'll do it our way. Mind you, they could also change their laws. So there's a bit of a scary thing going on here is really what it comes down to. Is the U.S. really going to take this seriously? I haven't heard anything else in the news since this has happened, but this was very worrisome a week ago when this first came out. And I'm glad Andrew started talking about it. I'm also glad that Carissa Corbera started talking about it. She is on TikTok and she has a great post on it. I'll link to it in the show notes on how you can act and what you can do. But I think it's super important to be able to talk about this and to be able to say, hey, you know what? This is something that we need to talk about. This is something that we need to assess whether it is a threat or not. This is something that we can't just let it go by, because there's been a lot of work that's been pushed onto the ISA in terms of non-government organizations, scientists, governments who have been put a lot of research, a lot of money, and a lot of time into making sure that we do this properly. And although some have rushed into it and others have not, it seems to have been pretty much gone in a way that we, as Andrew says, we have this wonderful opportunity to do this right. If we are going to extract minerals, we can do the studies to make sure that nothing happens, or to do it in a way that we have the least amount of impact on it. Am I for deep sea mining? Absolutely not. Do I think it's going to happen in my lifetime? Probably. Is it going to affect the EV community? Because that's why people want to deep sea mine, is for electric vehicles, to have the metals to make the batteries, which are currently mined in many places, but mostly in the Republic of Congo, which there are a lot of human rights violations that are associated with that project. And so being able to have it where human rights are not affected and being able to have it where you can just extract it as you please, that would be helpful if this extraction is going to happen. Now, with the developments, the huge developments and advancements in the technology to create batteries where the metals are used for electric vehicles, some of them aren't even using these metals anymore. And they're much more sustainable in the way we dispose of them, and the way we use them, the way we build them. So the development is getting fast. The technology is increasing at a rapid rate. Do we need this in the long run? Hopefully not. Is this going to happen in my lifetime? I do think so, but I'm not happy about it. But if we're going to do it, let's do it right, and let's make sure that we are on the proactive side instead of the reactive side, which we're usually on the end of the reactive side when we're extracting marine resources or any type of resources around the sea or around nature in general. So this is what we're talking about today, and I'd love to hear your opinion on that. Hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean. I've got a different episode on YouTube if you want to check that out as well. There's not a lot of resources. I just said it in a different way because I'm doing it more. It's going to be a little shorter. It's going to be a little bit more adapted towards YouTube, as I mentioned last week when I started to do this type of thing. But I want to create something different for the audio, just a little bit more raw, a little bit more old school for me in terms of the way I do it. It kind of excites me a little bit. YouTube's great. I love doing the video, but it's going to be done a little differently. So we're going to do it in different ways. So you can listen to it on video or on your way to work and through audio, or on your dog walks or in your nature walks, or however you want to do it, exercising, however you want to do it. Just listen to me, please. I'm just kidding. I love that you listen to me, and I love the feedback even more. So, hit me up on Instagram at How to Protect the Ocean, or hit me up on the website, speakupforblue.com. That's speakupforblue.com. Check it out. There's you can leave me a voice memo. You can go to our contact page and you can just write me an email. I answer those personally. Love to hear your thoughts on all of this. So thank you so much for joining me on today's episode of the How to Protect the Ocean podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Lewin, from the True North Strong and Free. Have a great day. We'll talk to you next time, and happy conservation.